First of all, thank you so much for joining us. This program is part of a series, Archives at Home, that highlights some of the artifacts in the BHEC Archives collection. Hang on. There we go. For those of you who don't know much about our archives, we house artifacts, documents, and photos relating to the Holocaust and to Holocaust survivors. Currently, our archives are at the JCC, but soon we will be in a new home under one roof with the rest of our offices at Temple Emmanuel. And I'm really looking forward to having even more opportunities to use anything in the archives to educate and commemorate and inspire. If anyone has questions about the archives or would like to come visit, we will be packing up pretty soon. So there might be a week or two that visits aren't able to happen, but please email me. I'm happy to answer any questions or arrange a visit when we can at any time. So tonight we'll be discussing two articles of clothing that are in our archives and their connections to the Holocaust. Both pieces were inspired by originals that belonged to children who survived, but there were 1.5 million children murdered in the Holocaust. So tonight we do remember and honor those children. Textile pieces are some of the most difficult items to preserve, but they can tell us so much about history, especially clothing, work, play, socioeconomic status, religion, and even politics. All of those aspects of life are woven into clothing. And it's also something that we can instantly relate to because we all wear clothing. It's just very intimate and very personal, and it helps us connect so much to the individuals and not just the statistics of the Holocaust. This evening, we're so happy to be joined by Heidi Damsky, who it sounds like many of you already know, but Heidi has knitted two incredible pieces and donated them to our archives. Excuse me. Before I introduce Heidi further, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the history of each of the pieces that she's knitted. The green sweater you see on the screen was knitted by Heidi, and it replicates a green sweater worn by Christina Schieger while hiding from the Nazis in the sewers of Lvov, Poland from 1943 to 1944. Knitted by her beloved grandmother, the sweater survived Christina's harrowing experience. Christina was nearly 4 years old when Germany and Russia divided Poland in 1939. At first, living under Soviet rule was not easy for Jews in Eastern Poland. Christina remembers being harassed and humiliated for being Jewish on the street, and new policies forced her family's business to close during this time. Yet, once the German army invaded in 1941, the situation changed again for Jews and life became even more difficult. Christina remembers many precious items that were stolen from her home, including her family's piano, their puppy, and several pieces of artwork. Late in 1941, the Nazis ordered all Jews in Lvov to move into a fenced ghetto. The inhabitants, including the Schieger family, lived in dirty and crowded conditions. There was little food and disease was rampant. During this time, Christina's grandmother knit her a green sweater. Christina's father, Ignacia Schieger, was a trained carpenter and used his skills to build hiding places for his children while they were in the ghetto. Christina would stand or sit with her brother, sometimes for entire days, when their parents went to work so as to not be discovered by the Nazis. In anticipation of the final liquidation of the ghetto, Christina's father and two other men began digging into the sewer lines should they need to escape. The inevitable happened in June of 1943, and the Nazis began liquidating the Lvov ghetto. There were 70 Jews who descended into the sewers, yet only 10 survived. 2 of them were children. And among those survivors was the Schieger family and their 2 children, Christina and her brother, Pavel. Christina and her family lived for 14 months in the sewer with several other Jews, aided by Catholic sewer workers who were paid by the families to provide them with some meager rations. When the families were unable to pay, one sewer worker, Leopold Sosha, continued to risk his life by taking them food. Conditions were extremely cramped, extremely squalid, and the hidden families lived with threats of rushing water, disease, rats, And of course, the never-ending fear of being caught. In addition to all of those life, dangerous threats, it was also, of course, just an extremely uncomfortable, frightening place to live. However, Christina did have her sweater that her grandmother knitted her throughout the entire ordeal. And we have to imagine that that provided some amount of comfort and, of course, warmth throughout. Lvov was liberated by the Soviet Army in 1944, and the Shiger family moved to Krakow, then eventually to Israel. Christina later immigrated to the United States. Leopold Sosha, the sewer worker who helped the family survive, died in 1946, but he and his wife, Magdalena Sosha, were recognized as righteous among the nations by Yad Vashem in 1976. The original sweater is housed at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, where it remains in remarkably good condition considering its age, although it has rarely been displayed due to the fragility of textiles. In 2014, expert knitter Dr. Leah Stern was moved by the story of the original, and she set out to create a pattern for knitters everywhere to keep the experiences of children in the Holocaust alive. Dr. Stern, did seek the approval of Christina Schieker, who now is Dr. Christine Karen, for the project. And now the pattern is sold in the USHMM gift shop, as well as Dr. Karen's memoir, The Girl in the Green Sweater, which I have pictured here. And we do have a copy of that in our library. However, our library is not accessible at the moment, but will be soon. So that can be checked out at BHEC. And then the picture on the left is a photo of the Shiger family in 1946. So of course, after the war, after their ordeal. And this is a picture of the original, and that is housed at USHMM. And then I have a side-by-side. We have Heidi's version on the left and the original on the right. So that's pretty amazing. And then the next story we have is about this red dress. This is the front and the back. Both of these images are of Heidi's replica of the dress. The original belonged to Judy Fleischer Cole. Judy also received this dress from her own grandmother. And her family was from Germany, but they fled shortly before her birth. In 1938, her grandmother liquidated their family's fabric store in Germany and gathered enough money to save the family from the Nazis, purchasing tickets to the last open port in the world, which was Shanghai, China. Judy was born there in 1940 in the international settlement of Hongqiu. After the Japanese occupation of the port, the Jewish refugees were forced into a 1 square mile area in the poorest section of town. Judy's family had very little money and conditions were pretty deplorable. Still, the family felt lucky to have escaped Germany and lived each day aware of their blessings. Information about family in Europe was especially hard to come by, and it got harder when letters from Judy's paternal grandparents stopped arriving. They soon learned that the paternal grandparents and several other relatives were killed at Auschwitz. During these years, Judy's grandmother knitted her a red dress, which is a reminder of the family's story of survival and their commitments to hope, while Judy donated the original to the Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center. Much like with the green sweater, a pattern was made for knitters to recreate the dress and honor the courage of Judy and her family. So in these photos, the larger photo on the left, the little girl in front is Judy, and her mother and grandmother are standing behind her. And the information we have for the photo is that it's at the beach with 2 locals in Shanghai, and this was in 1946, so after the war. The photo on the right is of Judy as a baby, and she's actually wearing the dress. It's a little bit hard to identify since we can't see that it's red, but she is wearing her red dress and her mother is holding her. And here is a photo of the original, and this is at the Illinois Museum. And then again, I've got side by side. We have Heidi's version on the left and the original on the right. So you can see the original is a little bit more threadbare. And now, once again, I'd like to introduce Heidi. Heidi is an extremely talented knitter. As you can see here, her two pieces on the screen. In addition to knitting, she's also traveled extensively and studied the Holocaust extensively. She's been to many Holocaust-related sites across Europe. So we're really happy to have her with us, and we're grateful for her donations. Thank you, Heidi. You can unmute yourself now.
I did it.
Hi. Thank you. Is there anything you want to say before I ask you a few questions?
Just really thank you for the opportunity to do this. I appreciate it very much. And I'm very happy that we have all these people here, and just happy to answer your questions. Just keep me to a time because I like to talk.
Okay, well, you're here because we want to hear you talk, but we'll keep an eye.
Well, I guess I'm going to interrupt you one second because there is one more thing.
Sure.
The green sweater, the pattern is the one that I was given that actually had to be written by looking at the sweater. So the woman who did this, who you mentioned earlier, it's pretty amazing because she did such a good job of capturing the design. The red dress was the same situation. Mine looks very different for that purpose because somebody looked at the dress and wrote the pattern while looking at what was done and trying to put it together based on the dress itself. And that also is pretty good. I would say pretty amazing. And probably both the people who created these, the grandmothers, did not have patterns and made these up in their head as they went along.
It's amazing. Well, that's a good note. Thank you. Well, my first question is, well, it's not really a question, but could you just tell us a little bit about your background and your interest in the Holocaust, as well as any other personal connections you have to the Holocaust?
Sure. I grew up in Brooklyn. I was born in 1950. So not too long after the end of the Holocaust. And I lived in a neighborhood that was of mixed immigrants from all over the world, a lot of Jewish immigrants and a lot of survivors and their children. So the Holocaust for us was but was part of our history as well. Like most of the people I knew, somebody lost someone, we lost people. And I didn't know them before because they never made it to America. My parents didn't know them. They never made it to America. And my grandmother lost two sisters. We never heard from them again. And so my earliest memories really of my aunt and my grandmother and my mother talking about not getting any information and never being able to find out what happened to them. That was the beginning, I guess, of something that came to me while I was growing up. My closest friend that I met when I was 6, she was 5, had arrived in our neighborhood very young, and her parents bought a newsstand that was right at the entrance to the train station on our corner. And she lived a block away. And Razi's parents and her aunt and uncle were really important people to everyone in the neighborhood. They saw them every day, every morning, and every night when they came home from work, and every time we walked to school. And her mother and her aunt were twins, and her father and her uncle were twins, and both sets met each other in Auschwitz. Razi's mother and her aunt hid in the wall of a neighbor's house, not a Jewish neighbor, obviously, and they kept them there, and they came out at night quietly to eat and be amongst the family, and then they went back in for the daylight and sat inside this wall on some steps that were built for them to sit on, and they read and they tatted. I don't know if anybody knows what tatting is, but it is a form of lace making. When Rosie and I were very young, we both knew how to knit. We learned how to sew. We learned how to crochet. I learned from my grandmother and my aunt at 5 years old. Rosie as well learned from her mother and her aunt. Her mother tried to teach us how to tat, but Rosie may have learned, but I did not. I still have trouble with it. So it kind of just, the tatting wheel sits next to me as a reminder. We were really good friends, and her mother was a wonderful human being. And that was really a beginning for me because I knew their stories and I knew what they went through in Auschwitz, and I knew what happened to them there. And it was amazing to me that two sets of twins married, came to America together. Her aunt and uncle never had any children. And she and her younger sister and brother became their children as well. There's a lot more to this story, but I think you get the picture. That was the beginning. So that was, I guess, a start. My mother's entire family was in the fabric industry. They made all of our clothes, all of my mother and my aunt's clothes and my uncle's clothes growing up, some of which my mother still had when she passed away because her father made them and she couldn't give them up. So I guess we go back a long way when it comes to garments and artistic nature in fabric.
That's great. Yeah, that tells us a little bit about your connections to the Holocaust and your history with knitting and garments. So as an adult, I know that you're very well traveled and well studied. Can you tell us a little bit about some experiences that you've had traveling to Holocaust related sites?
Yes, I had the good pleasure and really honor of being part of a national organization, the United Jewish Appeal, and I was with them for a good many years on the Young Leadership Cabinet. And through that agency, I got to meet a lot of second generation young people whose parents survived and came to America. But at the same time, I got to meet a lot of very well-known Holocaust survivors, as well as Deborah Lipstadt, who was part of our organization, but also became a very good friend and has been throughout the years that I was there and the years since. Eventually, I became chairman of the Young Leadership Cabinet. And when you're chair of the Young Leadership, I was on the Women's Young Leadership Cabinet. When you become chair, one of the things that you are asked to do is choose a trip that will take people into our history to find out about other Jewish communities, those that survived, those that didn't, and then on to Israel. And my counterpart, Tom Fallick, who was the Men's Young Leadership Cabinet chairman at the time, and I chose Poland. We thought that it was a very important part of our job as young leaders to learn more about what happened, to visit the camps, and more importantly, to pass on to a younger generation who was coming up through the ranks of communal work, who the people were, what the communities were before the Holocaust, and take survivors with us to Poland to see what had happened. It was the most fascinating trip that I had been on, and we had been on several and continued to travel to several communities after that. It was an amazing opportunity for me. We went to small communities and larger communities like Krakow and Warsaw. We visited many camps, and I had many experiences. The people who went originally with me, there were 6 of us that traveled together to pick out the places we were going to go. And the 2 people who led us on that trip were Marian Twersky, who resides still in Poland, and Roman Kent, may he rest in peace, lived in the United States up until he passed away. And I want to tell you this story because it pretty much tells you exactly why we must continue to do this. Marion and Roman grew up together. They were best friends. They traveled with their families. They were normal young teenagers when the war broke out. They went to Auschwitz together. Their parents were sent one place and they were sent another. And they stuck together pretty much in Auschwitz up until they were separated. And they were separated because Marion got very sick and he was sent to a hospital there to get back to work. And Roman continued to work. They never saw each other again. The first time they realized the other one had survived, Roman was already in the United States, and he had put together the first Holocaust reunion, survivors reunion. He saw Marion's name on a list and realized that his best friend growing up had survived the war as he did. Very different people at that point. Marion, staying in Poland, became the writer of an underground newspaper. And Roman was a very, very, very successful businessman. And I'm sure many of you out there who have heard Roman's name or maybe read things by him would know how wonderful he is. He has passed away. We got to travel with these two men, and they taught us so much. But I just share the one thing we saw between them throughout the entire trip. Every time we sat down to eat a meal, Roman and Marion would take turns getting up, one walking over to the other and cutting food in half, putting it on the other one's plate. And the other one would do the same back to the other person. Roman to Marion, Marion to Roman. This happened at every single meal. Finally, one night when we were sitting down together, we got up the nerve to ask them what that was about. Why did they do that? And they laughed and said, this is how we survived the Holocaust together and survived Auschwitz-Birkenau. We would share whatever we had with each other. And when we re-met, we continued to promise we would do this forever with each other. And that's what we're doing. It was such a profound statement of such a simple thing. We kind of guessed that might be what it was, but they did it so formally. It wasn't just, hey, here's, have some. It was presented on the plate. And it was done in such a loving, caring manner. And you understood what these two people meant to each other and that they survived for a very good reason. They both had something to tell the rest of us and to teach us. And it was very necessary for them to be with us. That was just one experience. And that was during the time that we were in Poland on the investigative trip. I know I'm going to go on long, but I'll tell you one more story about that, and then I'll tell you what happened on the rest of the trip, very short. Tom Fallick, who, as I said, was my counterpart, took us to the small town that his grandfather was the hat maker, hence the name Fallick, because it was like feather. And he had us shop in this town for years and years and years. When we got to the town, and we did have, of course, people who spoke Polish, and people were staring at us in the center of the town. They knew exactly why we were there. They were all looking at us, walking past and not being very kind with their language. And Tom had them, Roman, ask, where did the hat maker live before the Holocaust? And somebody pointed it out. We walked over to the house and there was a mezuzah still on the door. We knew exactly whose house that was. And I thought that was pretty amazing. But what was more amazing, when we walked back into the center of the town, two young men walked up to us. They were probably in their 40s. And they said in Polish to Roman and Marion, are you Jewish? And he said, yes, and started to back off. And they said, we have something for you. The synagogue stood over there. The night of the rabbi came to our house. He lived next door. He gave my father a box and asked my father to keep this and told him that someday Jews are going to come here and they're going to want to know what happened. And he's to tell the story of the Jews of this town, and he's to give them this box. So they went and got the box because they kept it all these years, and they brought it to us. And they told us that one night, all the Jews were called to a meeting at the synagogue. The doors were bolted on the outside. They were locked in, and they were all burned to death. That was the night they received the photo box. When we opened the box, it was filled with pictures of people in the town and the rabbi's family with a history. And we brought that back to America with us. And I'm sure that it sits in the Holocaust Memorial Museum. So it's very important that we continue these stories and that we travel and we get to know what happened from many different perspectives. We chose Deborah Lipstadt and Mark Talisman to be our scholars in residence on our trip to Poland. We took about, if I'm correct, we had 7 buses and we went in many different directions. And we had survivors with us, so we had probably about 300 people. It was incredible. I think we blew the people in Poland away by coming through with so many Jewish people headed to all these different towns. Martin and I led a group that went to Pietrkow, where our friend Naftali Lavi was a child. And I want to share this story because Pietrkow is a beautiful little town. It was absolutely wonderful. And Naftali walked and talked the entire time. He was someone who worked for United Jewish Appeal in Israel, welcoming all of us and making sure that we got our clothes off the plane many times, and also making sure that everything ran smoothly on all the trips that we took to Israel. Naftali's father was taken away when Naftali was about to be 13. The last thing he remembers his father saying to him was, "They're going to come for all of you. Please protect your younger brother. He's going to be famous one day." I have to tell you that Naftali told us that through the camps where he and his brother were, and his brother was very young, he was 7 years old. He couldn't be in the camp with his brother. But somehow everybody got together, and when they were called out in the morning, Naftali and the other men put a big rock behind them, and his brother stood on top of that rock so he would look as tall as the other kids. And they would never know how small he was because he never would have survived. And they all shared their bread with him and kept him going. Naftali kept this promise to his father. And later on, when they both made it out of the camps and made it to Israel, Naftali's brother became Rabbi Lau, the chief rabbi of Israel, and is still a very prominent rabbi. These stories are pretty amazing. We learned who these people were, who their families were. We cleaned up their cemeteries. We did a lot of things. I can never forget those experiences. And my very first experience inside of Theresienstadt, which was, of course, not in Poland, but all of the camps we went to. Majdanek, one of the worst. You just got to look and see a little bit into the lives of the people who we lost. And I felt that it was just extremely important for us to always talk about this amongst ourselves and amongst others, because we lost something great, something wonderful, human beings who could have made such a difference in all of our lives, and they still are by telling these stories. So So that's exactly why I have so much history, because I really care about this issue.
That's amazing. So you've had these really visceral, really personal experiences with Holocaust survivors and Holocaust sites. And so then with that in mind, how did you learn about first the Green Sweater Project, and how did your experiences motivate you to participate?
Well, my good friend Ronnie Hess, who I believe is on this. So hi, Ronnie. Hi, Donald. Martin told me you were going to be on. Ronnie knew we've been friends for a really long time, and Ronnie knows my passion for knitting and handiwork, and also we share a great deal of travel together through the Jewish world and the Young Leadership Cabinet and UJA and other organizations. So we've shared a lot of these same experiences, even though she's from the South and I very much from the North. Ronnie called me, or sent me actually an email and said, hey, have you seen this? Read the story. It's really important. I know that you will find the pattern and make this sweater. And I wrote her back and said, already found it. But the weird thing is, I bought this yarn a long time ago, and it's sitting in my house now. It came just a few days ago, and it's green. And I didn't know what I was going to do with it, but now I do. And I wrote her and said, for sure, this sweater will be knitted and it will go to the Holocaust BHEC here, because that's where it belongs. It's something that we need to see and something that we need to use as a teaching tool, because I think it's a perfect teaching tool. And the same thing with the red dress. It followed the same exact pattern. That Ronnie found something, let me know, and I researched it and found the pattern and the story, and it was just absolutely amazing. And I was glad to make it. I couldn't find the yarn they used. Well, actually, I did find the yarn that the woman used to re-knit the dress, not the original dress. And they didn't have the color anymore, and you had to order it specific. And you had to order a bunch of it for them to make it, because they hand dyed the fabric that the yarn that she originally used. But I got the dress done, and I knew it was going to follow the same place, because it needed to be there and it needed to be shared.
Well, we thank you for that. I guess, can you tell us a little bit about the experience of knitting these pieces, and just sort of what you thought about, and what kind of kept you motivated while you were knitting?
I think that I was thinking of two people who I very much admire for what they did, Mitzi Levin and Becky Seitel, may she rest in peace, of blessed memory. I thought what they did was the most amazing thing, to take the stories of our Holocaust survivors, the Alabama Holocaust survivors, and put them into a medium that gave people the ability to see inside of them and to know what happened. Through their artwork, through photographs, and through the stories told, they reached out to so many people, and it's a legacy that lives on and will live on way beyond them. And I thought that was amazing, and my hope was that that would happen with this. I worked really hard on the green one. I really wanted it to be perfect. The red one was a little challenging in a different way, but the challenge was just more important in some ways for me to stay connected to what I was knitting. It wasn't just something nice to do. It was a very important piece of history, of our history, and of the history of our people. It seems to me that there are many different ways of teaching about what happened without getting into the numbers of people, which is almost too much for someone to get their head around and their heart around. But through the lives of people and who they were and who their families were and what they did and the pictures of them and their clothing and their artwork, we have a way of talking about what happened during the Holocaust that can speak to every generation. And it's just a tool now for us to use, another tool. And I just kept that in my mind the whole time.
And for those of you who aren't familiar with Mitzi Levin and Becky Seitel, they created an exhibit for BHEC that's photography and paintings of Alabama Holocaust survivors and their stories, and it will be hung again pretty soon in our new location. But Heidi, what you were saying actually fits really well into what I was going to ask you next. As a knitter and as an artist, how do you think that art can enrich our understanding of the Holocaust?
Oh, I think it's extremely, extremely important. I think that it's a wonderful opportunity to start a conversation with people who want to know more. It's a really great way for us to stand up when we're speaking about the Holocaust and our history. It's an opening statement. We have been, like every culture, working in the arts forever to express ourselves, whether it's through poetry, whether it's through creating silver goblets that we use on Friday night, our Kiddush cups. Our history in the arts is very strong. Dance, clothing. I think that we can tell so many stories, but this particular, the green sweater and the red dress say so much more about people who survived. It really is an emblem of survival. Now, the red dress, because the family went to China, I think there is something to be said for that. And I want to share one other story. We were in Israel, and this is another way to answer your question. We were in Israel for our daughter Naomi, who's our older daughter, for her bat mitzvah. It was a family mission from Birmingham that joined another mission, a larger mission. It was amazing, but we promised Naomi before she left here that she could buy a piece of artwork to remember this trip, but she had to buy something in Israel, not just getting a gift. And we went up to Sfat on the trip, and Naomi was very, very taken by some artwork that were these beautiful pictures that were done on silk. The painter was Ruth Shani. She's a great artist, and the picture hangs in our house right now. And she also gave us a print that was made of the artwork she did. But she wouldn't just sell it to us, and she wouldn't just let Naomi get away with choosing this as her gift from Israel during the trip. She had to make Naomi hear her story and then promise to tell the story every time somebody saw the picture. And the story is that Ruth and her mother fled to China. They were lucky. They got out. She was very young and she was sickly, and she made it to China with her mother, and there she learned to paint on silk, which was a very, very common thing and still is in China. By learning that, by the time she got to Israel, she swore she would always paint on silk so that everybody would know the story when they came by and understand that living in China gave them the chance to survive. And so that's another way through the arts that we learn the stories of our people and the stories of our struggles. There are so many others, but Ruth was pretty impressive. And I remember Naomi telling that story to people when they would come in and see this beautiful picture in her room. So that was that. I will also say that I do think that Jewish artwork is pretty amazing. We can tell where the person who created a certain kind of jewelry or a Kiddush cup came from. If they came from Eastern Europe, if they came from Russia, if they came from Yemen, because of the type of work their art took. And Persia, it goes back forever, but our ritualistic pieces, ketubot, wedding rings, everything, shofars, scribes, people who write, it's all a form of art. It's all an opportunity. But specific to the Holocaust, there were so many beautiful artists. And in particular, I'd like to share one more that I think stands out. The pictures from the children of Theresienstadt. What a better way for us to be able to talk to other children about what they're seeing, what these children drew while they were locked behind gates and couldn't get out and just skip and play in their old neighborhoods. And these were the pictures they drew there because of wonderful people who helped them survive. And it gives us an opportunity to talk about all of that. And I hope that this sweater and this dress will do that when people go out to speak about the Holocaust to schools, and will use this in their talks.
Thank you. Yeah, I also hope that these and other artworks can be an entry point for people who might not necessarily know about the Holocaust or even think they want to know about the Holocaust, but that can kind of see something that they identify with in art. And I think you answered that really well. Thank you. My last question for you, which overlaps with your last answer, but I'll ask it anyway. Why did you donate these pieces to the HEC, and what do you hope their legacy will be?
Pretty much what I've said. I think it's, again, I hope that their legacy will be that they will last there as long as the originals lasted and more. And I hope that the BHEC will last for Alabama and Birmingham to be able to come and see all of these wonderful stories of people and learn that this was a real historical event that we need to pay attention to, and we need to be able to share it in ways that people will hear it and understand it. And to be part of that, I would like these pieces to be part of that educational process, to help people open their hearts and their minds to a time that was dark, and understand that we can never let this happen again to anyone, anywhere, and to be mindful and be kind. That's really what I would like to happen.
Well, me too, and we appreciate your donation. And I guess last thing from me, before we open it up to questions, I did get a message at the beginning. The designer of the pattern of the red dress is actually here, Melissa Shinsato, as well as Judy Kolb, who was the original wearer of the dress. So I really want to recognize that they're here, and that's a really unexpected and happy surprise. And if they would like to share anything with us, they're welcome to do so.
I'm impressed.
Me too. So Judy or Melissa, if y'all would like to say a few words, we'd love to hear from you, but no pressure.
Hi, this is Tanya Singer. I actually wrote the story of the red dress. I shared Judy's story on a site called Modern Daily Knitting, which the knitters here will know. And Melissa is my teacher and mentor and an amazing knitter. And she is not Jewish and was so taken by the story that she wanted to design a modern version for knitters. And as I mentioned in my note, we couldn't get to the museum. It was during COVID. And we found Judy's dress and we're so thrilled that I've actually had an intern working on research and helping find knitted objects. And the intern was a freshman in college and said, I found a red baby dress. And it was like, oh my gosh, like, this is so exciting. And it's from Shanghai. And it was like, so many people don't know the story of the Shanghai refugees and what happened, and to find a red baby dress. I mean, it was just so thrilling. And thank God we could be connected with Judy, who's here, and I don't want to steal her thunder, but just what an amazing, I mean, Judy is like, we have such a connection, the whole project. And so it's so thrilling to see Heidi, like here's a whole new community of people that I haven't met and Judy hasn't met. And here's a new, I always say to Judy, like, this dress has a life, and the green sweater too, but this dress has been around the world and back again. And it's just so exciting. And I'll just say that there's more information about the project, and we're always looking for more knitted objects. We have more coming, Heidi, so get your needles ready.
I'm ready. I am so excited that you're here because I admire you so much. And this is very exciting for anyone out there who's a knitter. This is the best.
Well, I feel the same way, and I just like, again, that you're bringing this to new people in a new community, and that this dress keeps doing the work of opening doors. And as you said, Rachel, like sort of providing a way into the stories that otherwise people may avoid. So I don't want to steal from anything that Judy Kolb might want to say, except just to say, as we approach Thanksgiving, I'm so deeply grateful to her for letting me share her story with the knitting world. It's already been in the museum, but in my crazy knitting world.
We are.
Thank you so much, Tanya.
I will say a few words.
Bravo.
So, as we've all been home this last year and a half, the highlight of my being home was meeting Tanya. It kept me going through COVID. It's been a wonderful relationship. And yes, that was my dress, and still is my dress hanging in the museum. And I think partly, obviously, since it's red and very small, it's really attracted a lot of attention as people come through the museum. And about, 5 years ago, there's the museum for those children and schools that don't come to the museum, maybe don't have the funds to come or are too far away to come. The Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center has a trunk program that they send out to schools with loads of information in it. And at some point, teachers, when they asked teachers, what else would you like to have in the trunk? They said artifacts. Well, you obviously cannot put in original artifacts in there. Those are very precious and kept under secret code wherever they are in the building. So a group of knitters got together and duplicated my red dress. Lots of shapes and forms came out of it, but now they had pieces to put in this teaching trunk. And Tanya's group, who was knitting the dress, also donated this last year some dresses to go into the teaching trunk. So now kids had something tangible that they could actually put into their hands and say, this was someone who survived, although I do not call myself a Holocaust survivor. The museum calls us or gives us the designation of being second generation survivors. That's fine with me. I do not think of myself as a Holocaust survivor. So my life in Shanghai, I was born a year after my parents and grandparents' arrival. My life was normal. I knew nothing different than where I was. I didn't know the hardships everyone was going through. I had parents, a set of grandparents. I had an uncle who opened a bakery. What could be better than that? So my experiences were very positive. But it wasn't until I was an adult and my parents and grandparents had already died, and I saw a video, a documentary called The Last Port of Resort, and I was shocked. I was totally shocked about the circumstances in the Shanghai ghetto, how difficult it was, how many illnesses were spread around, how people suffered. None of the Jewish people there suffered as far as starvation. There were organizations locally of the Jews in Shanghai, an American organization that sent funds and food. So none of our refugees died, but situation was very, very difficult, none of which I experienced when I was in Shanghai. So again, that's my connection to the broader picture of the Holocaust. I've been volunteering at the museum, Illinois Holocaust Museum, since '09, since it's opened. I'm a second generation speaker. It's been an amazing journey. I meet a lot of very interesting people. We do have a Shanghai safe haven from a harbor, a separate exhibit that's there now. So again, that's increased my visibility, and I've met a lot of interesting people, and it continues to be a wonderful place to be, even though the story obviously is touching and horrible and sad. There are positives that come out of all of that. So it's been my privilege to work at the museum and spend time there, and also to meet Tanya, which has been a real thrill this last year.
Hi.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry, Melissa, go
Oh,
ahead.
Hi, everyone. This is Melissa Shinsato, and I just wanted to mention something about the design. It's kind of hard to see, but on the skirt, there's a pattern of cables. And when I designed them, I thought they looked like butterflies. And so I called them butterfly cables. And Heidi just mentioned the children of Terezin, and they created one of the children had a poem which was, "I never saw another butterfly." And in one of the Facebook live conversations we had, I was asked if I knew about that poem, and I didn't. And we all agreed it was some kind of divine inspiration that shone down and helped me to call it a butterfly pattern. And I just thought that was such a beautiful thing. So I wanted to share that.
This is Heidi. I want to say thank you to you, especially for that design. I love doing it. And that's exactly what I thought about when I was doing it.
Isn't that amazing? So thank you very much, Heidi.
Thank you. Great job on the design.
Yes, and so to clarify, I'm not sure I made that clear earlier, Melissa is the one who created the pattern just by looking at the original dress. So thank you for that. And I can't tell you how, what a special surprise it is to have you guys here. Thank you so much, Tanya, Judy, and Melissa. And I guess at this point, does anyone have any questions for Heidi or any of our other special guests?
I put a few in the chat, Rachel. Lynn.
Hi, Lynn. Let's see. Lynn would like to ask, she says the Spungen Family Foundation has a strong connection with the Shanghai Holocaust story. Have they had a connection with this project?
Sorry, no, I've been in
Oh.
touch with Danny Spungen, and was hoping to meet him when I live in New York, Melissa, and I live in New York. And I had the pleasure of meeting Judy and a group of knitters at the museum on August 1st. It was like the highlight of my year, that special day at the museum with Judy and our knitting crew. And Danny was traveling and rushing around, so we did not get to meet, but we are aware of each other, and he is not involved in the project.
I am going to be in Chicago this week, and we'll see Danny, and I'm going to tell him about this.
Please
also,
do. Yeah, he definitely knows about it. And actually, this is wild. And it just fits with what Heidi has sort of talked about, this theme of like all these little connections that happen when you wade into this. It's a very small little world. And so, so Danny came to me. I found Danny because when Judy's story ran, it got covered by a local Westchester County newspaper, and a survivor named Charles, whose parents owned a knitting factory in Belgium and unfortunately were lost, called me. And he's a very elderly man, and he called me and he said, "You need to know Danny Spungen." So it's like this really tiny little network of people, and it was one of those things that it's amazing how many calls I got from all different corners of this little world.
He really likes archives, and his foundation has just made an extraordinary gift to our new space, the archive space. So we're so excited about that. Also, I am going to come to the Skokie again to see again the museum. So I hope to hook up with some of y'all.
Well, make sure you request Judy as a guide.
I will. I'm going to get her information. And I want to invite all of y'all to come to Birmingham. We won't be open with our exhibit space till the end of the first quarter of next year, or even the beginning of the second quarter. And I think that you will be very proud of what we're doing in Birmingham. And thank you for this program. It was amazing. It is amazing.
And for those of you who don't know, Lynn, who was just speaking, is our director at BHEC. Also, another question in the chat, is there a way to get the pattern? And I know there is Ravelry the best source for the pattern of the red dress? And Heidi, I believe you said for the green sweater as well?
Yes, but I think that having Tanya on there, she can tell you better than I can how to get the pattern. The red dress
I'm happy to gift the pattern to everybody here, so I'll give you my email address, and I'm happy to gift it to your group.
Thank you.
Email me. Yeah, you're very welcome.
And the pattern is available in the gift shop of the Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center, with the dress hanging there to show the outcome of the pattern.
I'll pick it up.
Okay.
That's wonderful. Thank you both. That's just great.
We did have another question. Hang on, let me scroll up. Zoe Wheel says, "What a beautiful way to tell the story of survivors. Is there any current effort to recreate clothing of victims who were murdered? Schindler's List red dress imagery comes to mind."
Is that for me or for Heidi?
I guess for the whole gang, if anyone knows of any other projects like this.
Tanya, you have the best research.
I have, and Judy knows this, I have more stories, and I'm just limited by my ability to get them out into the universe. And, this sort of became an obsession of mine, and I've been at this for 2.5 years now. So I feel safe in saying that here. It's like a strange thing to be interested in, but it's sort of intersection of knitting and the Holocaust, and Heidi touched on it. you know, we've learned about food and the recipes, we've learned about music, we've learned about children's art, we've heard about, you know, adult art. There's been a lot of things that fit into this bucket of material culture, and how Jews turn to material culture or the arts to survive and keep their spirits high and so on. But the story of knitting hasn't been told. So that's what I'm hoping to be able to do. And it's me and friends like Melissa who are kind enough to help me out, because I'm not a designer. But there are many, many objects. And in fact, just last week, I've been working on the Imperial War Museum in the UK for a long time. And I finally got this little dress, and I told Judy about it. We spoke earlier this week, and I sent it to Melissa. I like called Melissa. I was like, you need to see this dress. And it's a different sort of, it's a different life, of a different possible way Judy's life could have gone. It was another little girl born in Germany, and she was actually a Kindertransport child. And so it's just work digging, you know, and back to archives and the importance of archives. And so it's now, I'm hoping that the BBC gives me rights to the taped testimony of the woman who's unfortunately passed away. So it's you know, sort of each story is a rabbit hole in the best possible way, and trying to really get the facts, because as you know, it's just so important to get the stories right. And it's not my experience, I'm just sharing. And so, yeah, so there's a lot of research, and there's just more and more to come. And there's a design in the works right now with a really young designer who's in grad school. I'm very excited. She happens to be at U Chicago, so another Chicago connection. And so that will be coming out probably this winter. So I will make sure to alert you, Heidi, and we can get your group involved.
I'd be very thrilled to do that. I also have another place for you to look in England, through the BBC probably, but the British Antiques Roadshow did an entire piece on artifacts with survivors, children of survivors, grandchildren of survivors, and survivors that they could have, that were able to get to the show. And if you could find that, you probably could find it on Amazon Prime. But it was one of the most interesting shows that I've ever seen, because they brought things with them that survived from their families that, you know, some of these were grandchildren of survivors. So it was fascinating. And they had a lot of pieces of family art and family garments. And it was wonderful. And they also have a lot of other stories, the BBC, that happened. A lot of people made it to England and have lots of stories to tell.
Great.
Yeah. I'll try to send you some other stuff. Any questions?
I think those are all the questions in the chat for now. Last call for questions, but Heidi, thank you so much for taking this project on, donating to BHEC, and being so willing to talk candidly with all of us about it. And it was just really icing on the cake to have Tanya, Melissa, and Judy join us. That's just really an amazing connection that you guys made for us. So thank you. It was great to hear from all of you. Zoe did just send the link to the survey. If anyone would fill that out, that would be really helpful. And I guess that's all we've got for tonight. But thank you all so much for joining us. And thank you to Heidi and everyone else who spoke.
And thank you. This was amazing experience for me.
Great. Well, thank you for sharing.